Your fantasy world needs to stick with its logic. This was going to be a different type of video, but as I was talking about it, I needed to frame my thoughts differently. And this is where I'm landing. This is what I'm landing on. It's reductive to tell a DM you can do what you want, especially if they are trying to get you to talk about the rules that are raw. If we are having a discussion about a situation and you say, well, you could just do what you want as a DM, we are being reductive in the conversation of that's being held. Like, hey, this is the situation I have planned, or this is the situation that happened. What was the right call here? The conversation should stick with raw, what you think as a DM should happen. It is not good DM advice to just say, do what you want. Because now we're not having this discussion. We're not talking about how this will work in the mechanics. You need to have logic in your fantasy world. Just because it is a fantasy world doesn't mean that any logic, no matter what, can be thrown out the window. Yes, magic does exist, but magic has logic within these worlds, within these universes, within these worlds. Yes, we don't have magic. We can't just make fire appear. But a fantasy world, yes, you can make fire appear, but why does the fire appear? What is the properties of said fire that is now appearing in your hand? There is a in-world reason why you can make this fire. The magic exists for a reason. It is part of this world, is what I'm saying. So, raw, D&D has established its own rules. It has established how the mechanics work. And when somebody asks advice about said mechanics, you tell them to the best of your ability how these mechanics work. This would be good DM advice. There will be a separate video in the future about talking about the different types of bad DM advice that I think there are out there, because not all advice is good, just like not all tables are actually ran well, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Today, I want to talk about the logic within your worlds and why logic matters in said worlds, and why saying just do what you want, it's a fantasy world, is not good advice. A fantasy world isn't immersive because it's cool. Like, yes, it being cool and it being fun to witness or be a part of in D&D's case, or in a video game case, is what draws you in. But to keep you there has to be consistency. No matter how fantastical something is, there needs to be consistency. So if we're going by like just rules as written, mechanic stuff with consistency, rules as written, now in 2024, you have potions be a bonus action. That's what the mechanic says. If somebody's like, hey, I'm going to take a potion as a bonus action, you say, yes, you can do that. Now, if you're like, well, you're threatened and you're getting flanked, so your bonus actions, potions now in action because of these arbitrary rules in this situation that I have not established could actually happen. So I want to nerf you in this way. That's not going to satisfy your players. Yes, you can do what you want as a DM, but that is not a good... Telling somebody to do something like that would not be good. But that's what they wanted to do, because no one told them that they shouldn't and couldn't do that. So they did it, and now your players are pissed off. Like, where's the logic in that? Now, if there is something that mechanically makes sense, but the situation makes it different, then yes, you make a judgment call. There is a situation in my early days of DMing. I still don't know if there's a rule for this. I know it is in Baldur's Gate 3, so there might be a D&D rule on this, but I've never looked. I just went with my gut on how electricity affects water. Players are in a swamp, and lizard folk comes and attacks their carriage. One of my players uses something that had lightning damage to a creature that was in the water. And they asked if I hit this creature with this lightning damage, will it affect the lizard folk around it? I didn't know if there was a mechanic with it, but instead of looking it up, I ruled that yes, that makes sense. Water conducts electricity. So I'll say, within 10 feet of said creature, the other creatures have to make a saving throw to see if they get electrocuted or not, or shocked, and which might possibly turn into electrocution depending on their hit points. And now that is a rule that I came up with on the spot that made sense with the situation because of the logic of the world. Now I have to be consistent with this logic. I have to now say yes, whenever there is water, electricity will affect it. Even if I see a ruling that says otherwise, I've now established this logic. And then same thing goes with if you do something raw for one character, you have to do it with another character if it's the same exact situation. You can't play favorites when it comes to ruling. There needs to be consistency with the logic. If somebody is asking, I like to play the game as rules as written or rules as intended as possible, give me advice. Give them advice on the rule. Say what they should do with what is given. If they thought the same way as just do anything you want, then they wouldn't be asking the question in the first place. You're not helping them learn what they should be doing in this situation. And this is just talking about mechanically staying consistent with what you are doing with the game. Just because it's a fantasy world doesn't mean there isn't logic. There needs to be logic for it to be immersive. Now, going outside of mechanics, a world will have its own rules. This could be dependent on each world, and the logic of this universe might be different than the logic in this universe. And whatever happens in your game, in your homebrew world, might be different than this homebrew world. But you have to stay consistent. A big example of this is Game Grumps' Let's Play of Tears of the Kingdom. Spoilers for the ending of Tears of the Kingdom, by the way, if you haven't played it. At the end of the game, when Link is diving for Zelda, and he catches her, and then pencil dives into the water below, Aaron makes a comment of like, oh, well, all their bones would be broken, saying that would hurt, all their bones would be broken, this is impossible. I would agree if they haven't established that this is how water works in this world. We established very early on, the very beginning of the game, after the prologue happens and we are thrown into the world. Once we escape the temple, the very first thing we do is jump. We jump a great height into water to do the rest of the tutorial. The game is teaching us this is how this works. You could jump from any height, and as long as you dive, you won't get hurt. And then we get off the Sky Islands with a much larger jump, but there's water underneath, and you're able to pencil dive into it without taking damage. This world works off of this logic. It is early on established that this is how this works. If something new is introduced, it is explained, and then it is later on stayed consistent with the logic of the world. So the ending of Tears of the Kingdom, while in our world, yes, even if you pencil dive, that's probably still going to hurt. And that's the same in your world. You can't just say you could do anything can happen. There is no logic because there is magic. There should be logic because that needs to be immersive. If the logic of the world keeps on changing because you could just throw it up, chalk it up to, it's magic, so anything could happen. Magic still has logic within said world. Like my example before, there's a reason why you could produce a flame. There is, even if it's just an innate product, you could still do it. Or on the flip side, divine magic. You have magic from the divine. If you lose the divine, if your god cuts you off, let's say there is an example, like a cleric is doing everything that their god doesn't like and they cut them off. The rules of your world establish that you get your power from the god. If the god says, no, you're not allowed to have my power anymore, they're not a cleric anymore. That's how that will work. Until they find a new god that will give them divine energy, they're not a cleric anymore. You could rule as, well, it's just a fantasy world. It's just you fucking could cast Cure Wounds anyway, even though your god cut you off. Now it's not immersive. Now it doesn't make any sense. There is now a rule that is being broken within the world. Consistency is key to making an immersive world. You can't just change something and chalk it up to it's fantasy. Anything could happen in fantasy. Like, sure, you can make anything happen in a fantasy world. I will agree, but you have to be consistent in what happens in said world. You have to establish the world's logic in order to make it, work. Sonic could breathe in space. Anthro characters could breathe in space in the Sonic universe. They have established that they could breathe in space. This doesn't work with our world logic, but it works within this game's logic. Something innate to these Anthro characters make them be able to breathe in space in a vacuum. Now, if we had a future game where Sonic is thrown into space and can't breathe, is suffocating because he's in space, that doesn't make sense to what has been established. You can't change the rules of your world just to make a situation seem more dire than it would originally have had been with the rules that have been set. And while I love Doctor Who's great. I've recently gotten into it because of White. There is a thing in Doctor Who, and a lot of Whovians like to just chalk up to timey-wimey or other things. You know, it's a sci-fi world and a lot of crazy things happen, so this inconsistency is fine. Doctor Who has a bunch of inconsistencies. That personally pulls me, whenever a inconsistency happens like that and that's not explained, pulls me out of the world personally. A rule has been established, and yet you are not obeying that rule that has been established because you want to force a situation to happen, and that doesn't feel good because, like, well, why does it work this way, but then it doesn't work with this thing until it's actually explained why did it work this way this other time because of another variable. And Doctor Who has a bad tendency to make shit up on the fly just so they can make a situation happen. Early New Who, not as much, and I'm okay with some of the changes and I could kind of justify them. But now, like, Chibnall era and Russell T Davies 2 era has been really throwing some screws in there. Really throwing a wrench in the gear, you know? But that's the thing, even something as beloved as Doctor Who, people will complain about the inconsistencies because now it's not immersive and there is a problem of why does it work here but it doesn't work here. There needs to be an explanation. You can't just chalk it up to fantasy world, logic doesn't matter. Logic matters. No matter how fantastical the world is, logic matters within said universe. There is so many examples of this, of series doing a good job with this and series doing a bad job with this. So yes, when it comes to you making a D&D campaign and asking or giving advice to other people with their campaigns, go with what you know. If somebody's asking a generic question, go with what the book says. Or you could ask, how does this normally work in this world? Or whatever. Most people are going to go by mechanics. And then make judgment calls depending on their knowledge of the mechanics at that moment. If it's something that is not just very clear cut. Oh, roll me a dexterity saving throw for this. You know, something clear cut like that. Sometimes there's a bunch of variables in play and you have to make a judgment call. You do the best you can with the knowledge you have of the mechanics and the knowledge that you have of the world itself. If you somehow establish, with my water example earlier, if you somehow establish that water doesn't work the same way in this world as it does in our real world, there is, like, let's say water is more viscous than it is in our world, and electricity that will not conduct through it, or there has been a vitamin added to water from the government that makes it not conduct electricity. as long as you establish some weird rule with this and make it not work the way that we would think, like, and you are consistent with that, unless if you do something like that, you need to just you just have to go with the knowledge of what your players have, and you can't change how that works unless if you say, hey, this is different because of this extra variable here. I know I haven't talked about it, but there is this one thing happening. Now, rug pulls in a narrative sense is not an issue. You can be like, this doesn't work. You don't know why it doesn't work the way you thought it would, but it doesn't work. As long as there is a way for them to find out, it doesn't even have to be in that encounter. As long as there's a way for them to find out and be like, oh, this didn't work because an artificer made this thing for him that we found on his body after we killed him. And that's why it didn't work the way we thought. Or I did a really good perception check and saw this thing on his belt that makes him resistant to whatever. Or gave me disadvantage on range checks, or whatever it could be. Logic needs to be consistent with your world is the bottom line. And if you're going to be a DM, or if you're going to give advice to a DM, and they don't say anything specific on how the logic works in their world, work off of what the book says. Mechanically, hey, this is how this should work to the best of your ability in this situation. This is how I would rule it. Saying, it's your world, just do what you want, is not teaching them anything that how they would think. They're like, I mean, yeah, I could do whatever I want, but I'm trying to find help because I don't know what I want to do with this. Just rule things as good as you can. I don't know. That's the video.